The receipt fell from Mark's wallet like a confession. I almost missed it. A small slip of paper that fluttered to the hardwood floor as I emptied his pockets before tossing his jeans into the washing machine. Something so innocent. A toy store receipt for a stuffed giraffe, $24.99 plus tax. Nothing extraordinary except Mark and I didn't have children. I stood in our laundry room holding the receipt between my fingers, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. It was dated 3 weeks ago, a Tuesday, when Mark had texted me about working late for a client emergency. Maybe it's for his niece, I thought. But his sister's daughter was 15 now, well past the age of stuffed animals. I slipped the receipt into my pocket instead of throwing it away. Something told me to keep it, the way animals sense a storm coming before the clouds appear. That night, I watched Mark across the dinner table as he talked about his day, studied his face for signs of deception. He looked the same as always, his dark hair slightly tousled, the laugh lines around his eyes deepening when he smiled at me. 11 years of marriage had made his expressions as familiar to me as my own reflection. "How's Sarah from accounting doing?" I asked casually, twirling pasta around my fork. "Sarah." He paused just a fraction too long. "Fine, I guess. Why do you ask?" "Just wondering. You mentioned she was helping with the Morrison project." "Oh, right." He nodded, relaxing. "She's good. Really good at her job. His work wife, as he jokingly called her for the past 2 years. I'd never worried about it before. Mark had always been transparent, leaving his phone unlocked, sharing stories about colleagues, including me in company events. But now I watched him eat, wondering about the invisible threads that might connect him to someone else's life. The perfume was the second sign, so subtle I nearly dismissed it. A whisper of something floral and unfamiliar when I leaned in to kiss him goodbye one morning. Not cologne, definitely feminine and certainly not mine. I favored woodsy, earthy scents. This was all peonies and vanilla. I pulled back slightly, my lips barely grazing his cheek. "New cologne?" I asked. Mark's hand instinctively went to his neck. "What?" "Oh, just the usual." Something smells different." I kept my voice light, conversational. "Probably the new fabric softener," he said, already turning toward the door. "Gotta run. Big meeting today." I watched him through the window as he backed out of our driveway, his sedan disappearing around the corner. 11 years, and I'd never once questioned his faithfulness. Mark had been solid, dependable, the kind of man who remembered anniversaries without reminders and still brought me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. We'd met in college, built a life in this modest 3-bedroom house that my grandmother had left me. It was mine before it was ours, the only thing I'd inherited besides her collection of vintage teacups and an African gray parrot named Jasper. The late nights began increasing after that. Not dramatically, Mark was too careful for that. Just an extra hour here, a client dinner there. Always with plausible explanations, delivered with the right amount of frustration at being kept from home. I found myself awake at midnight, listening to the garage door open, counting the seconds until his footsteps reached our bedroom. "Sorry," he'd whisper in the darkness. "Morrison account is killing me." One night while he showered, his phone lit up on the nightstand. A text notification from SW appeared briefly before fading away. Sarah Williams. I'd met her once at a company Christmas party. Tall, blonde, younger than me by several years, with a bright laugh that carried across the room. Mark had introduced us with his hand resting innocently on my lower back, proprietary and proud. "My wife Emma," he'd said, and I remembered feeling secure in those 3 words. I didn't touch his phone that night. Somehow, crossing that boundary seemed like admitting something I wasn't ready to face. Instead, I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, wondering if he dreamed of someone else. "Tell me about your work wife," I said casually over breakfast a few days later. The term had been a running joke between us for years. Mark looked up from his coffee, his expression neutral. "Sarah? What about her? You mention her a lot lately." I kept my tone curious, not accusatory. "The Morrison project must really be intense." "It is." He nodded, looking relieved at my understanding. "She's been pulling late hours too. Actually saved my ass on the quarterly projections." "She sounds dedicated." "She is. Single mom, you know. Works harder than anyone to provide for her kid." I felt something shift in the air between us. Single mom. This was new information, or at least newly shared with me. I didn't know she had a child, I said carefully. Mark's eyes flicked to his watch. Yeah, little boy. Cute kid. He stood abruptly. I'm running late. Dinner at 7. Sure, I said, but he was already grabbing his keys, planting a quick kiss on my forehead before heading out the door. Little boy. Cute kid. Not her son, or her child, but little boy. The kind of generic description someone might use if they were trying to distance themselves from familiarity. Or the kind someone might use if they knew the child quite well and caught themselves almost saying too much. That afternoon I found myself driving past Mark's office building during my lunch break, something I'd never done before. I wasn't planning to go in. What would I even say? That I was checking up on him? That seemed desperate, paranoid. Instead, I parked across the street at a small cafe and ordered a sandwich I couldn't taste. Through the window I watched the entrance to his building. Not expecting anything, just needing to see the physical space where Mark spent his days. Where Sarah worked alongside him. Where late nights happened over the Morrison account. And then I saw them, Mark and a blonde woman emerging from the building together. Even from this distance I recognized her from the Christmas party. They weren't touching, nothing inappropriate. Just two colleagues walking to the nearby deli, laughing at something I couldn't hear. But there was an ease between them. A comfort in each other's space that spoke of familiarity. I sank lower in my seat, though they never looked my way. My sandwich sat forgotten as I watched them order lunch, take a table by the window. Their conversation seemed animated, heads leaning slightly toward each other. Not the behavior of lovers in public, they were too careful for that, but the undeniable connection of two people who shared more than just work. When I returned home, Jasper greeted me with his usual, "Hello, pretty lady," a phrase Mark had taught him years ago. I stroked his feathers absently, my mind elsewhere. I needed evidence. Something concrete beyond suspicions and receipts and the scent of perfume. I found it a week later while searching for an envelope in Mark's home office. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally. The desk drawer had stuck, and when I yanked it open, papers scattered onto the floor. As I gathered them, a small photo slipped from between insurance documents. 3 faces smiled up at me from glossy paper. Mark, Sarah, and a toddler with Mark's dimples and Sarah's blonde hair. They stood in front of a carousel, the child balanced on Mark's shoulders, Sarah leaning into his side. A family portrait in everything but name. I sat back on my heels, the photo trembling in my hand. The room seemed to tilt around me as pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The toy store receipt. The late nights. The perfume. The increasing mentions of Sarah in conversation. Not to hide her existence but to normalize it, to make her presence in our lives so common that I wouldn't question deeper connections. The child looked about 3 years old. The timing aligned perfectly with when Sarah had joined Mark's company. When he had first mentioned his work wife, with what I now recognized as an edge of guilt beneath the humor. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor of his office staring at that photo. Minutes or hours, time stretching like taffy as my marriage unraveled in my hands. Eventually I heard Jasper squawking from his cage in the living room, jolting me back to the present. With careful movements, as though handling something explosive, I returned the photo to its hiding place. Then I straightened the papers, closed the drawer, and walked to the kitchen to start dinner as though nothing had changed. But everything had. Mark's birthday was approaching, his 40th, a milestone he'd been both dreading and joking about for months. I'd been planning a surprise party, something intimate with close friends and colleagues. Now, standing at the stove stirring pasta sauce that I couldn't smell over the scent of my burning world, I realized the party would still happen. But it would serve a very different purpose than celebration. I added his favorite spices to the sauce mechanically, my mind racing ahead. I would need to speak to a lawyer. To understand my rights regarding our house. My house technically, though we'd shared it for most of our marriage. I would need to create a guest list. To send a special invitation to Sarah. When Mark came home that night, I greeted him with a kiss and asked about his day. He gave me the usual answers and I nodded in all the right places. We ate dinner across from each other as we had thousands of times before. But now I saw him clearly. The slight shadows under his eyes, the way he checked his phone when he thought I wasn't looking, the practiced ease of his lies. "Your birthday's coming up," I said, pouring him another glass of wine. "Anything special you want to do?" "Nothing big," he said, smiling that familiar smile that once made me feel safe. "Just dinner with you would be perfect." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Don't worry. I'll take care of everything. And I would. Just not in the way he expected. I've always been a planner. The kind of woman who color codes her calendar and labels leftovers with expiration dates. Mark used to tease me about it, calling me his little organizer, with that affectionate smile I once believed was reserved only for me. Now that same organizational skill would become my weapon. The morning after discovering the photograph, I called in sick to my job at the elementary school library. In 15 years of employment, I'd accumulated over 30 unused sick days. Today seemed like an appropriate time to start using them. I waited until Mark left for work, kissing him goodbye as though nothing had changed, before pulling out a fresh notebook and labeling the cover, "Birthday Surprise." First, I needed legal advice. Not from our family attorney, a golf buddy of Mark's who would undoubtedly mention my visit. Instead, I searched for a female lawyer specializing in divorce and property disputes. I found Diane Kerrigan, whose website promised discreet consultations and empowering legal solutions for women. Her office was in a neighboring town 30 minutes away, where I was unlikely to bump into anyone who might report back to Mark. Diane's office was minimalist and elegant, with degrees framed on dove-gray walls and a desk free of clutter. She was older than I expected, with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She listened without interruption as I explained my situation. "The house was left to me by my grandmother," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It was in my name when we married. Mark moved in with me about 6 months before the wedding and we've lived there ever since." "Did you ever add him to the deed?" Diane asked, making notes. "No. We talked about it a few times but something always came up. He wanted to wait until we refinanced, then until after some work promotion. It just never happened." Diane looked up, a small smile playing at her lips. "Well, that's fortunate for you. If the property remains solely in your name and was yours before marriage, you have strong grounds to maintain full ownership, especially given the circumstances. So I can ask him to leave?" "You can do more than ask. You can legally require it with the proper documentation." She adjusted her glasses. "Now about this surprise party you're planning." For the next hour we outlined a strategy. Diane would prepare eviction papers that would be ready 2 days before the party. She explained that while divorce proceedings would take time, removing Mark from the property could happen much more quickly given the clear ownership status. "Document everything," she advised as our meeting concluded. "Receipts, text messages, anything that proves the affair. It may not change the property situation, but it could impact other aspects of the divorce settlement." I left her office with a strange combination of dread and elation. The path ahead was clear if painful. The notebook in my purse felt heavier now, filled with dates and legal terms and next steps. I had a plan. My next stop was less official but equally important: Party City. The irony wasn't lost on me as I filled a shopping cart with black and gold decorations for Mark's 40th birthday. Balloons proclaiming "Lorty and Fabulous," and the big 4-0. Paper plates with "Over the Hill" printed in cheerful font. Party hats and noisemakers and champagne flutes for a toast that would become a reckoning. As I waited in line to pay, I scrolled through my contacts, mentally compiling a guest list. Mark's colleagues, naturally, including Sarah. Our neighbors. His college friends who still lived nearby. And his family, particularly his father, Richard, who had practically adopted me as his own daughter after my parents died. Richard, who had helped us move furniture into my grandmother's house all those years ago, who still called every Sunday just to chat. The thought of Richard witnessing what I planned made my stomach twist. But he deserved to know the truth about his son, even if it hurt him. Perhaps especially because it would hurt him. Back home, I set the party supplies in the spare room closet and began making calls. The first few were easy. Friends who responded with enthusiasm about the surprise party. "He'll never expect it," they assured me, and I smiled at how right they were. When I reached Mark's office, I asked for Jessica in HR, whom I'd met at company functions and knew to be discreet. "Emma, what a nice surprise," she answered warmly. "I'm planning a surprise party for Mark's birthday," I explained. "I'd love to invite some of his work colleagues." "Of course. I can give you email addresses if that helps." "That would be perfect. And Jessica." I paused, steadying my voice. "Could you include Sarah Williams? I know she and Mark work closely together on the Morrison account." "Sarah? Oh sure. If Jessica found the request odd, she didn't let on. She's actually out today, something about her son being sick. But I'll add her to the list. Her son, I repeated, the words burning like acid. I hope he feels better soon. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table staring at Jasper's cage by the window. The parrot watched me with his intelligent eyes, head tilted quizzically. Mark had bought him for me 5 years ago when my grandmother died, knowing how much I'd loved her collection of exotic birds growing up. What do you think, Jasper? I asked. Should we teach you a new word? Pretty lady, he responded, his go-to phrase. No, something different. Something appropriate. I approached his cage and whispered, divorce. Can you say that? Divorce. Jasper blinked, unimpressed. But I knew he was listening. African greys were renowned for their intelligence and vocabulary. It might take time, but the idea of him squawking that word during the party gave me a bitter satisfaction. That evening, I created digital invitations on my laptop, careful to use Mark's work email rather than his personal one. I wanted him completely unaware until the moment of revelation. For Sarah's invitation, I decided on something special, a hand-delivered note. The idea of seeing her face to face, of studying the woman who had inserted herself into my marriage, gave me a strange sort of courage. I found her address through a simple internet search. She lived in a garden apartment complex about 20 minutes from my house. The next day during my lunch break, I drove there with the invitation in my purse, heart hammering against my ribs. Her building was modest but well-maintained, with geraniums blooming in planters by the entrance. I checked the directory. Williams, Apt 14B. Second floor. Each step up felt like climbing a mountain, but determination pushed me forward. I would not confront her, not yet. This was reconnaissance, a chance to see the enemy on her home territory. I knocked on 14B, half hoping she wouldn't be home. Then the door opened and there she was. Sarah Williams in yoga pants and a faded university t-shirt, blonde hair pulled into a messy bun. Different from the polished professional I'd glimpsed at the Christmas party, but unmistakably the woman from the photograph. She looked confused, then alarmed as recognition dawned. Emma. Hi, Sarah. I smiled, projecting a calmness I didn't feel. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. No, she glanced behind her into the apartment. What are you doing here? I'm planning a surprise party for Mark's 40th birthday. I pulled the invitation from my purse. I wanted to personally invite you since you work so closely together. Her face went through a series of emotions, shock, suspicion, relief, and something like guilt, before settling on an uncertain smile. That's very thoughtful. Well, you're his work wife, right? I kept my voice light, friendly even. It wouldn't be a proper celebration without you there. She took the invitation with slightly trembling fingers. I'll check my calendar. Please do. It would mean so much to Mark. I tilted my head slightly. And feel free to bring your son. There'll be other children there. If my knowledge of her child startled her, she hid it well. Thanks, but he might be with friends that night. His father, she'd almost said. Not with friends. With his father. Of course. Whatever works for you. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Sarah? Mark has no idea about this party. It's a complete surprise. I won't say a word, she promised. I thanked her and walked away, my legs somehow carrying me down the stairs and to my car before they started shaking. In the privacy of my sedan, I gripped the steering wheel and took deep breaths. I had looked into the eyes of the woman my husband loved and invited her to witness his downfall. The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. The next week passed in a blur of preparations. I confirmed the catering, finalized the guest list, and practiced my speech in front of the bathroom mirror while Mark was at work. This house. No longer yours. Simple, direct, devastating. 2 days before the party as planned, I picked up the eviction papers from Diane's office. They felt substantial in their legal envelope, the weight of them somehow reassuring. That same day, I visited the bank and removed half the money from our joint savings account, depositing it into a new account in my name only. Not everything, I wasn't greedy or vindictive, just my fair share. Divorce, I whispered to Jasper every morning and evening. Divorce. By the eve of the party, he had started to mimic the word, though imperfectly. It sounded more like divorce or sometimes demorse, but it was close enough. The night before the party, Mark and I lay in bed together for what would be the last time. He scrolled through his phone while I pretended to read a novel, each of us occupying the same physical space while living in different worlds. "Any plans for tomorrow?" he asked casually. "Just a normal Saturday," I replied, turning a page I hadn't actually read. "Maybe we'll go out for dinner? For your birthday." "Sounds perfect," he said, setting his phone aside and turning off the lamp. In the darkness, he reached for my hand. "Thanks for not making a big deal about turning 40. You know how I feel about fuss." I squeezed his fingers, allowing myself one final moment of connection before letting go. "Don't worry," I whispered as he drifted towards sleep. "Everything is taken care of." And it was. The eviction papers were hidden in my nightstand drawer. The guest list was confirmed, 37 people including Sarah, who had RSVP'd with a terse, "I'll be there." The caterers would arrive at 4. The house, my house, was clean and ready for its transformation into both a party venue and a stage for retribution. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight, I listened to Mark's familiar breathing beside me and mourned for what we had been, for what I had believed we were. One last night of silence before the storm I was about to unleash. Morning light filtered through the curtains as I opened my eyes. The space beside me was empty. Mark had already left for his Saturday morning run, just as I'd hoped. His predictability, once comforting, now served my purposes perfectly. 3 miles along the river path, followed by coffee at Westside Brew. He wouldn't be back for at least 90 minutes. I lay still for a moment, feeling the weight of the day ahead pressing down on my chest. This was it. The last day I would be Mark's wife in anything but legal documentation. I allowed myself one deep breath of hesitation before swinging my legs over the side of the bed and standing up. No time for doubt now. The guest text went out at 9:15 a.m. Party still on for 5 p.m. Mark leaves at 4 dinner reservations and returns at 6. Park on Elm Street to keep driveway clear. Responses pinged back immediately. Thumbs up emojis and excited affirmations. Our friends were eager accomplices in what they believed was a loving surprise. Only I knew it was something else entirely. I spent the morning transforming our home. My home. Black and gold balloons clustered in elegant bunches in each corner of the living room. A banner spanning the archway to the dining room proclaimed, "Happy 40th birthday," in glossy letters. I arranged photographs on the mantel, carefully selected memories that told the story of our marriage. College graduation. Our wedding. The trip to Maine for our 5th anniversary. Each image a testament to what I'd believed was true. The dining room table became an elegant buffet station, covered with a black tablecloth and set with gold-rimmed plates. The caterers would bring hot appetizers, but I'd prepared platters of cheese, fruit and charcuterie myself, arranging each item with the precision of an artist. A 3-tiered cake, chocolate with buttercream frosting, Mark's favorite, held the position of honor, over the hill written in elegant script across its surface. Jasper watched from his cage as I worked, occasionally offering a "pretty lady," or his new favorite word, which now sounded convincingly like divorce. Each time he said it, I rewarded him with a blueberry, reinforcing the behavior. "You're going to be perfect tonight," I told him, adjusting his cage so it had a clear view of the living room where the confrontation would occur. The caterers arrived exactly at 4, setting up warming trays and arranging bite-sized delicacies on silver platters. At 4:15 I heard Mark's car backing out of the driveway. Right on schedule, he was leaving to pick up what he thought was my birthday surprise. A reservation at Antonelli's, the Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date. In reality, I'd never made a reservation. The maitre d' would apologetically inform him they had no table for Harris, perhaps suggesting he'd gotten the date wrong. By then it would be too late. The first guests arrived at 4:30, our neighbors Mike and Loretta, bearing a gift-wrapped box and confused smiles. "I told Mark to meet me at Antonelli's at 5:30, I explained, taking their coats. "He should be back here around 6, thinking he's bringing me to dinner. That's when we surprise him." More guests filtered in, voices hushed with conspiracy, eyes bright with the excitement of a well-executed surprise. Mark's college roommate David. Colleagues from his accounting firm. Our dentist and his wife. My fellow librarians from the elementary school. Richard, Mark's father, arrived at 5:15, hugging me tightly. "He's going to love this," Richard said, his eyes crinkling with affection. You're too good to him, Emma. If only you knew, I thought, but smiled and directed him toward the bar. Help yourself to a drink. Mark should be here in about 45 minutes. By 5:45, the house hummed with the energy of 30-some people trying to be quiet, conversations flowing in excited whispers, champagne glasses clinked discreetly. I positioned myself near the window, watching the street, the eviction papers tucked into a decorative folder on the coffee table within easy reach. At 5:53 I saw her. Sarah, parking her silver Subaru across the street, checking her reflection in the rearview mirror before emerging. She wore a navy blue dress, simple but elegant, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. She didn't come alone. My heart stuttered as a small figure climbed out of the back seat. A boy of about 3 with tousled blonde hair and a little sweater vest over a button-down shirt. Mark's dimples were unmistakable even from this distance. She'd brought their son. Whether it was naivete, brazenness, or simply childcare necessity, I couldn't guess, but it changed nothing about my plans. In fact, it made them more poetic. I turned from the window, composing my face into a mask of pleasant anticipation. Everyone, I announced quietly. They're almost here. Remember, lights on but quiet until I give the signal. A hush fell over the gathering, expectant faces turned toward me. Through the window, I watched Sarah approach, holding her son's hand, uncertainty in every step. The doorbell rang and the room held its collective breath. When I opened the door, Sarah's smile faltered at the sight of me. Emma. I thought. Right on time, I said brightly, ushering her inside. Mark should be home any minute. Everyone's already here. The little boy looked up at me with curious eyes, Mark's eyes, and my resolve wavered for just a moment. He was innocent in all this, a child born into deception through no fault of his own. But I steadied myself. This wasn't about punishing a child, it was about truth. I'm Thomas, the boy announced with the unfiltered confidence of toddlers. Hello, Thomas, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. There are cookies on the kitchen counter if you'd like one. Sarah looked around nervously at the assembled guests, most of whom were watching her with naked curiosity. She clearly recognized some of Mark's colleagues who were exchanging glances and whispers. The connection was being made. Mark's work wife had arrived with a child who looked remarkably like their coworker. I led them into the living room, painful awareness prickling at my skin. This woman had shared my husband's bed, had borne his child, had built a parallel life alongside mine. Yet seeing her discomfort, the protective way she kept her hand on her son's shoulder, I felt a strange kinship with her. We had both loved the same man. We had both been deceived by him, though in different ways. Sarah, Richard said, approaching with a slight frown. I didn't expect to see you here. His eyes dropped to Thomas, widening with recognition. Before Sarah could respond, headlights swept across the living room window. Mark was home. Places, everyone, I called softly, and the guests obediently gathered in the center of the room, Sarah and Thomas automatically joining them, though Sarah looked like she might be regretting her decision to come. I positioned myself at the front of the group, directly in Mark's line of sight when he would enter. The eviction papers were now in my hands, the envelope cool against my sweating palms. I heard his key in the lock, the familiar sound of his footsteps in the entryway. Emma? He called, confusion in his voice. Are you ready? The restaurant lost our reservation somehow, but they can still take us at 7 if we... He rounded the corner into the living room and froze. 37 faces stared back at him, not yelling, surprise, as expected, but silent, watching. His eyes darted from person to person, processing, colleagues, friends, his father, until they locked onto Sarah and Thomas standing near the center of the group. The blood drained from his face. What is this? He whispered, but he knew. In that moment we all knew. Happy birthday, Mark, I said, my voice carrying in the silence. I thought it was time for everyone to meet your family. All of your family. Murmurs rippled through the guests. Sarah pulled Thomas closer to her side, her face a mask of mortification. Richard took a step backward, his hand going to his chest as though physically struck. Emma, please, Mark began, taking a step toward me, his hands raised in supplication. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain, I interrupted, my voice stronger than I'd expected. Your work wife is actually just your wife. Or at least the mother of your child. I turned to the assembled guests. How many of you knew? I'm curious. No one raised a hand, though several of Mark's colleagues looked at their shoes, discomfort evident in their postures. I moved to the center of the room, placing myself directly between Mark and Sarah. I've been planning this party for weeks. The invitations, the decorations, the cake. I gestured around the room. But I've also been planning something else. I opened the envelope and withdrew the legal papers, holding them up so everyone could see the official letterhead. This house belonged to my grandmother. She left it to me before we were married, Mark. Did you know it was never in your name? Not legally. Mark's face contorted with confusion, then dawning comprehension. Emma, don't do this. Not here, not like this. This house. I continued as if he hadn't spoken. No longer yours. I extended the eviction papers toward him. You have 72 hours to remove your belongings. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy as a tomb. Then from the corner Jasper's voice rang out, clear as a bell, divorce. Someone gasped. Someone else stifled a shocked laugh. Mark stood frozen, the papers in his hand, his eyes pleading with mine. I turned to the guests, summoning a calm I didn't entirely feel. I apologize for the deception, but I thought you should all know the truth. There's plenty of food and drink. Please stay and enjoy the party if you'd like, though I understand if you prefer to leave. For a long moment no one moved. Then Richard stepped forward, his face ashen. He looked at Mark, at Sarah and Thomas, and finally at me. Without a word he turned and walked toward the door. The sound of it closing behind him felt like the period at the end of a sentence. Other guests began to stir, uncertain glances exchanged, murmured excuses offered. Some left immediately, coats gathered hastily. Others hovered, torn between decorum and morbid fascination. Mark remained rooted to the spot, clutching the eviction papers, his face a study in devastation. Daddy. Thomas called, breaking free from Sarah's grip and running toward Mark. Is this your birthday party? Mark knelt, gathering the boy into his arms, his eyes closed against what I imagined were tears. Yes, buddy, he said, his voice thick. But we need to go now. Sarah approached cautiously, her face flushed with humiliation. I didn't know, she said to me. About the party, I mean. I wouldn't have. I know, I replied, surprised to find I believed her. You thought I was oblivious. That I didn't know about you and Thomas. She nodded, eyes downcast. He told me you were separating. That you were staying in the house until it sold. A bitter laugh escaped her. I guess we were both lied to. I felt a strange absence of anger toward her. She was as much a victim of Mark's deception as I was, in her own way. Take him home, I said, nodding toward Mark, who was still clutching Thomas. I think the party's over. As Sarah collected her son and guided a shell-shocked Mark toward the door, I stood in my living room surrounded by half-empty champagne glasses and the ruins of my marriage. Yet instead of devastation I felt something unexpected. Relief. The weight of suspicion, of pretending, had lifted, leaving me lighter despite the pain. The party that was meant to celebrate a milestone had instead marked an ending. And perhaps, though I couldn't see it clearly yet, the beginning of something else entirely. The front door closed behind Mark, Sarah, and Thomas with a soft click that somehow echoed through the silent house. For a moment I stood alone in the center of the living room, surrounded by the elaborate party decorations that now seemed garish and out of place. The happy 40th birthday banner hung limply, its cheerful message at odds with the heaviness in the air. Then I became aware of the remaining guests, about a dozen people who hadn't immediately fled, their faces a mixture of shock, discomfort, and undisguised curiosity. Someone coughed awkwardly. A glass clinked against a table. The spell of frozen silence broke, and the room erupted into hushed conversations. My hands trembled slightly, the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation beginning to ebb. I smoothed down my dress, a navy blue sheath I'd chosen specifically because it made me feel strong, and approached the small sound system in the corner. My fingers found the volume dial, and soft jazz filled the uncomfortable silence. Please, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, help yourselves to food. There's plenty and it seems a shame to waste it. A few guests drifted toward the buffet table, more out of politeness than appetite, I suspected. Others gathered their belongings, murmuring apologetic goodbyes as they slipped out. I nodded graciously, playing the role of hostess as though this were any ordinary party that was winding down. Loretta, my next-door neighbor for the past 7 years, approached cautiously. Emma, honey, she said, her voice gentle as though speaking to someone gravely ill. Do you want us to stay? Or would you rather have some privacy? I considered her question. Did I want to be alone with the wreckage of my marriage, or surrounded by the awkward sympathy of acquaintances? Neither option seemed particularly appealing. Actually, I said, I could use some help taking down these decorations. Loretta squeezed my arm. Of course. Mike and I will stay as long as you need us. As the room gradually emptied of guests, a small group remained. Loretta and Mike, my friend Jenna from the library, and surprisingly 2 of Mark's colleagues, Tina and Derek, who had always been friendly to me at company functions. They moved around the room with quiet efficiency, removing balloons, gathering discarded napkins and packaging leftover food. I found myself at the mantel, removing the photographs I'd so carefully arranged hours earlier. My wedding photo stared back at me, Mark and I beaming at each other, blissfully unaware of what lay ahead. Had he already been unfaithful then? Or had that come later? I would probably never know. Do you want these packed away? Jenna asked, indicating the frames in my hands. Yes, I replied. In the storage closet upstairs. I can't look at them right now. As she took the photographs, the doorbell rang. My heart lurched, wondering if Mark had returned for a second confrontation. But when I opened the door, it was Richard standing on the porch, his face drawn and aged beyond his 67 years. May I come in? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The others glanced over but tactfully continued their cleaning, giving us space. Richard had been more father to me than my own had ever been. After my parents died in the car accident during my sophomore year of college, he'd stepped in, helping with funeral arrangements, checking in regularly, even attending my graduation when I had no family left to cheer for me. When Mark had introduced us, the connection had been immediate and genuine. I'd often joked that I'd married Mark partly for his father. Now Richard stood in my foyer, looking lost and diminished. I needed to come back, he said. I couldn't leave things like that. I led him to the kitchen, away from the others. He sat heavily at the breakfast bar while I made coffee, the familiar ritual giving my hands something to do. Did you know? I asked, my back to him as I measured grounds into the filter. About Sarah and the boy? Richard sighed deeply. No. I swear it, Emma. If I had. I turned to face him. What would you have done? Told me. He met my eyes, his own red-rimmed but steady. Yes. It would have broken my heart to hurt you, but yes, I would have told you. I believed him. Richard had always been direct, a trait Mark had inherited but perverted with his deceptions. I drove around the block 3 times before coming back, he confessed. I didn't know what to say to you. I still don't. Except that I'm sorry. So damn sorry. The coffee maker gurgled behind me, filling the kitchen with its warm, comforting aroma. It's not your fault, I said. He's my son. I raised him. Whatever he's become, that's on me somehow. I shook my head firmly. No. Mark made his own choices. He's 40 years old, Richard. He doesn't get to blame his father for his mistakes. Richard's shoulders slumped. 40 years old with a secret family. Jesus. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. I keep thinking about that little boy. My grandson, I guess. His voice caught on the word. I didn't even know he existed. The coffee finished brewing and I poured 2 mugs, adding cream to Richard's the way he liked it. I slid it across the counter to him, our fingers briefly touching in the exchange. What will you do now? He asked after taking a sip. File for divorce. Move on. I shrugged, the simplicity of the words belying the complexity of the task ahead. What about you? He gazed into his coffee cup as though it might contain answers. I don't know. Try to make sense of it all, I suppose. Figure out what kind of relationship I can have with Mark after this. And maybe, if it's allowed, get to know my grandson. The thought of Richard building a relationship with Thomas stirred complicated feelings in me. Jealousy, sadness, but also a strange sense of rightness. The boy deserved a good grandfather and Richard deserved the chance to be one. I think Thomas would be lucky to have you in his life, I said honestly. Richard's eyes welled with tears. You're a remarkable woman, Emma Harris. Too good for my son, that's for damn sure. He reached across the counter and took my hand. I want you to know something. This He gestured vaguely around us, indicating the house, the situation, everything. Doesn't change anything between us. You're still family to me. You always will be. A knot formed in my throat. In the calculation of divorce I had factored in many losses, but somehow had overlooked the potential loss of Richard. His words offered an unexpected comfort. Thank you, I managed. That means more than you know. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, sipping coffee, processing the seismic shift in our shared reality. From the living room came the murmur of my friends' conversations as they finished cleaning. I should go, Richard said eventually, standing up. Mark called while I was driving. He wants to meet to explain himself. He shook his head wearily. As if there could be any explanation that would make this acceptable. What will you say to him? The truth. That he's made the biggest mistake of his life, and he'll have to live with the consequences. Richard hesitated. And I'll tell him to respect your wishes. To leave this house and give you the peace you deserve. I walked him to the door where he paused again. Emma. That display with the microphone and the eviction papers. It wasn't like you. I felt a flash of defensiveness. He humiliated me, Richard. For years. I know. And maybe he deserved a public reckoning. He touched my cheek gently. I just hope it gave you what you needed. After Richard left, I returned to the living room to find it transformed. The decorations were gone, the furniture restored to its normal arrangement, and the leftover food neatly packaged in storage containers. My small group of supporters stood awkwardly, coats in hand, clearly ready to depart but unwilling to leave me alone. Thank you all, I said, genuine gratitude washing over me. I don't know what I would have done without you tonight. We're here for you, whatever you need, Loretta assured me, pulling me into a motherly hug that nearly undid my composure. Just say the word, Mike added, if you need help when Mark comes to collect his things. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. One by one they embraced me and left until only Jenna remained. You should stay with me tonight, she suggested. My guest room is always ready. For a moment I was tempted. The thought of sleeping alone in this house, surrounded by the ghosts of my marriage, held little appeal. But then Jasper chirped from his cage by the window, a soft, pretty lady, that somehow steadied me. Thank you, but no, I said. I need to reclaim this space. Make it mine again. Jenna studied my face, then nodded. I understand. But I'm calling you first thing tomorrow, and I'm bringing breakfast whether you want it or not. After she left, I locked the door and leaned against it, the silence of the house enveloping me. It was over. The confrontation I had planned for weeks, the moment of truth I had both dreaded and longed for, had come and gone. Mark knew that I knew. The world, our small corner of it anyway, knew as well. I moved through the rooms, turning off lights, straightening cushions that were already straight, delaying the moment when I would have to climb the stairs to the bedroom we had shared. Jasper watched me from his cage, his intelligent eyes following my restless movements. Just you and me now, old friend, I told him, opening his cage door to let him perch on my arm. His feathers were soft against my skin, a familiar comfort. Divorce, he squawked, and despite everything I laughed, a genuine sound that surprised me with its freedom. That's right, I agreed, stroking his emerald feathers. Divorce. My phone buzzed from the coffee table, a text message from Mark. I hesitated before picking it up, steeling myself for pleas or accusations. But the message was brief and oddly formal. I'll come for my things on Monday at 2 p.m. if that's acceptable. I'll be quick and respectful. No apology. No explanation. Just the practicalities of disentanglement. I typed a simple fine, and set the phone down. Upstairs, I faced the bedroom with determined steps. Inside, everything looked as it always had. The cream duvet smoothed across the king-sized bed, Mark's reading glasses on his nightstand, the framed landscape print we'd bought in Vermont hanging above the headboard. Yet everything had changed. This was no longer our room, our bed. It was mine. I opened the closet and stared at Mark's suits and shirts hanging neatly beside my dresses. Tomorrow I would box them up, prepare them for his arrival on Monday. Tonight I simply closed the door, shutting away the visual reminder of his presence. On the nightstand my wedding ring caught the lamplight, glinting gold and innocent. I had removed it before the party, placing it deliberately where he would see it. I picked it up now, feeling its weight in my palm, 11 years of marriage distilled into a small circle of metal. With a decisive motion, I dropped it into the small ceramic dish that held my everyday jewelry. I would not throw it away in dramatic fashion. I would not flush it down the toilet or hurl it into the river in a symbolic gesture of severance. Instead, I would simply stop wearing it, stop defining myself by it. Perhaps someday I would sell it or have it melted down and reshaped into something new. For now, it was enough to set it aside. As I changed into pajamas and slipped between cool sheets, I realized I was sleeping on his side of the bed. A small rebellion that felt surprisingly significant. The tears I had expected, had perhaps even planned for, didn't come. Instead, I felt an unexpected clarity, as though a fog had lifted. The public reckoning was over. The private one, the slow, painstaking process of rebuilding my life without Mark, was just beginning. But as I drifted toward sleep in the center of a bed that now belonged only to me, I felt the first tendrils of something that might eventually become peace. Monday arrived with a clarity that only early spring can bring: crisp air, brilliant sunshine, and the faint scent of earth awakening after winter's long sleep. I rose early, having slept better than I expected, and faced the day with a strange combination of dread and anticipation. Mark would be coming at 2 o'clock to collect his belongings. Our first encounter since the disastrous party. I spent the morning methodically boxing his clothes, books, and personal items. Each object carried memories. The sweater I'd given him for Christmas 3 years ago, the collection of mystery novels he read on rainy Sundays, the old baseball mitt from his college days. I packed them carefully, without anger but with a growing sense of detachment, as though they belonged to someone I used to know but had drifted away from. In his desk drawer, I found more evidence of his double life: receipts for children's clothing, a finger painting signed Thomas in wobbly letters, a birthday card from Sarah with words too intimate to belong in our home. I added these to a separate box labeled personal in neat block letters. By noon, the physical remnants of Mark's presence in the house were contained in 8 cardboard boxes stacked in the foyer. I made myself a sandwich but couldn't eat it, my stomach nodding with anticipation. Instead, I wandered through the rooms, seeing them with new eyes. The furniture we'd chosen together. The wall color we'd compromised on. The photographs I'd taken down from the mantel, leaving conspicuous empty spaces. My lawyer had advised me to have someone present when Mark came for his things. A witness to ensure everything remained civil. I'd asked Mike from next door, but as the designated time approached, I sent him a text releasing him from the obligation. Something told me this needed to be private, this final chapter between Mark and me. The doorbell rang at precisely 2 o'clock. Mark had always been punctual, one of his virtues, though now it seemed like such a small thing to have appreciated in a husband. I opened the door to find him standing on the porch, looking somehow diminished. His usually immaculate appearance was slightly rumpled, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. Behind him, his car sat in the driveway, trunk open and waiting. "Emma," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you for packing my things." I stepped aside to let him enter. "The boxes are over there. I tried to be thorough, but if I missed anything, let me know." He nodded, moving past me to examine the stack of boxes. "Did you have help?" he asked, not looking at me. "No. I did it myself." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "We need to talk about the divorce proceedings." He straightened, finally meeting my eyes. "Diane Kerrigan, right? That's who you've hired." I nodded, unsurprised that he'd already learned my lawyer's name. Mark had always been efficient in a crisis. "My attorney will contact her this week." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache despite everything. "I won't contest anything, Emma. The house is yours. I know that. We can split the other assets however you think is fair." His reasonableness should have been a relief, but instead sparked a flare of irrational anger. "How generous of you," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Giving me what's already legally mine." "That's not what I meant." He sighed heavily. "I'm trying to make this as painless as possible." "Painless?" I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "Like your affair was painless? Like lying to me for years was painless?" He flinched as though I'd struck him. "I deserve that. I deserve all of it. But can we not do this right now? I just want to get my things and go." "Fine." I stepped back, gesturing toward the boxes. Take them and go. He lifted the first box, carrying it out to his car. I watched from the doorway as he made trip after trip, loading the physical evidence of our life together into his trunk and back seat. Neither of us spoke. The only sounds were his footsteps on the hardwood floor and the occasional grunt of effort as he lifted the heavier boxes. As he picked up the last one, the personal box containing the evidence of his other life, he paused. You looked through my desk. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes. How long have you known? About Sarah and Thomas. Long enough. I didn't elaborate. Let him wonder how many months or years I might have suspected, how many clues I'd collected before the final revelation. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I never meant to hurt you. The platitude ignited something in me, not the cold, calculated anger that had fueled the party confrontation, but a raw, honest rage. Don't, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Don't you dare say that to me. You made 1,000 choices, Mark. 1,000 opportunities to come clean, to end our marriage honorably, to be a man instead of a coward. You chose deception every single time. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. You're right, he said simply. I was a coward. I still am. He shifted the box in his arms. Is there anything else you want to say to me? Anything you need to hear from me? I considered the question. What could he possibly say that would matter now? Just one thing, I said finally. How old is Thomas? I want to know how long you've been lying to me. Mark looked down at the box in his hands. He's 3.5, he said quietly. It started about 4 years ago. After the miscarriage. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. 4 years. Almost the entirety of the time we'd been trying to have a child of our own, dealing with fertility treatments and the devastating loss of our pregnancy at 12 weeks. While I'd been grieving, he'd been building another family. Get out, I whispered, unable to look at him anymore. Just get out. He hesitated as though there was something more he wanted to say, but then turned and carried the final box to his car. I watched as he closed the trunk, got into the driver's seat and backed slowly out of the driveway. He didn't wave or look back. I closed the door before his car disappeared from view. The house felt cavernous in his absence, filled with a silence that seemed to have physical weight. I moved through the rooms methodically, opening windows to let in the spring air, as though I could cleanse the space of his presence. In the backyard, the weathered fire pit we'd installed years ago caught my attention. A thought formed, crystalline and perfect in its simplicity. I returned to the bedroom and opened my closet. On the top shelf, in an acid-free box I'd carefully preserved, was my wedding dress. I lifted it out, feeling the weight of the satin and lace in my hands. Next came the wedding album from the shelf in the den, the framed photographs I'd removed from the mantel, and finally the small velvet box containing my wedding ring. The fire took time to build, but I was in no hurry. I arranged kindling and logs in the pit with care, making sure the structure would burn evenly and thoroughly. As the flames caught and grew, I sat in an Adirondack chair watching the fire strengthen, its warmth reaching toward me in the cool afternoon air. One by one I added the items to the flames. The wedding photographs curled and blackened at the edges before igniting. The album cover warped and split, revealing pages that flared briefly bright and then collapsed into ash. The wedding dress took longest, the fireproof qualities of modern fabric resistant at first, but eventually surrendering to the persistence of the fire. I didn't feel the vindictive satisfaction I'd imagined. Instead, a quiet sense of finality settled over me as I watched these symbols of my former life transform into smoke and cinder. This wasn't about destruction but about release, letting go of what had been to make room for what might be. The ring I held until last, rolling it between my fingers, feeling its familiar weight and contours. Then, with a deep breath, I tossed it into the heart of the fire where it disappeared among the glowing embers. It wouldn't melt. Gold requires much higher temperatures than a backyard fire pit could generate, but I would dig it out later, a small, soot-blackened circle that I could sell or repurpose or simply put away. As the fire began to die down, Jasper's squawk from the kitchen window reminded me that life continued. I had responsibilities, a job to return to tomorrow, bills to pay, a parrot to feed. The mundane details that had seemed insignificant in the drama of recent events now offered a comforting structure to build upon. That evening I called a contractor recommended by Loretta, a woman who specialized in home renovations. We arranged for her to come by the following weekend to discuss possibilities. The master bedroom would be first, transformed from a space of shared sleep and secrets into a sanctuary of my own design. Then perhaps the kitchen with the farmhouse sink I'd always wanted but Mark had vetoed as impractical. The house would become mine in more than just legal documentation. It would reflect my tastes, my preferences, my vision. Spring turned to summer and with it came gradual healing. The divorce proceeded without drama, Mark keeping his word to contest nothing. Richard called regularly, his support unwavering, though we tacitly avoided discussing Mark beyond necessary updates about the legal proceedings. He had met Thomas properly now, his grandson, and I found I could listen to his careful, joyful descriptions of the boy without the sharp pain I'd expected. Loretta and Mike became fixtures in my life, inviting me for backyard barbecues and bringing over homemade casseroles on days when cooking for one seemed too daunting. Jenna introduced me to her brother-in-law at a 4th of July picnic. A kind man with laugh lines around his eyes who asked thoughtful questions and listened to the answers. I wasn't ready for anything beyond friendship, but the interaction left me with the realization that someday I might be. 6 months after the party that had changed everything, I hosted a dinner of my own. Not a grand affair, but a gathering of the people who had helped me through the darkest days. Loretta and Mike, Jenna, my colleagues from the library, Richard, who drove up from Philadelphia for the occasion, and a few neighbors who had offered quiet support in various ways. They arrived to find a transformed space. The walls, once beige at Mark's insistence, now glowed a soft sage green. The heavy leather furniture he'd preferred had been replaced with comfortable, modern pieces in natural fabrics. The dining room table, our old one, stripped and refinished by my own hands, was set with my grandmother's china and fresh flowers from the garden I'd started in the backyard. As we gathered around the table, glasses raised in a toast to new beginnings, I looked at these faces. Some familiar for years, others newer to my life but no less valued, and felt a surge of gratitude so intense it nearly overwhelmed me. These were my people. This was my home. Later, after the dishes were cleared and coffee served in the living room, Richard found me in a quiet moment by the kitchen door. "You look happy," he said, his eyes crinkling with genuine pleasure at the observation. Not just putting on a brave face but actually happy. I considered his words, turning them over carefully in my mind. "I am," I replied, surprised to find it was true. "Not all the time and not without effort. But yes, I'm finding my way there." "I'm proud of you, Emma," he said softly. "The way you've handled all of this. The grace you've shown." "Grace." I laughed lightly. "I publicly humiliated your son at his birthday party and taught my parrot to squawk, divorce. I'm not sure that qualifies as graceful." Richard's smile was rueful. "Everyone's entitled to one moment of justified dramatic revenge. It's what you've done since then that matters." From the living room came the sound of laughter. My friends, my chosen family, filling my home with warmth and life. Jasper, perched on his stand in the corner, had long since abandoned divorce, for a new phrase I'd taught him: new day. He repeated it now, his timing impeccable, making Richard chuckle. "Smart bird," he said. "He is," I agreed, reaching out to squeeze Richard's hand. "And he's right. Every morning is a new day." The fire that had consumed the remnants of my old life had cleared the ground for something else to grow. Not a perfect life. I still had moments of anger, of grief, of uncertainty about the future. But a life that was authentically mine, built from the ashes of what had been destroyed but stronger for having endured the flames. I rejoined my guests, settling into a chair beside Jenna, who was describing her latest adventure in online dating to much amusement. The conversation flowed around me, drawing me in with its current of shared stories and gentle teasing. Outside, the garden I'd planted caught the last golden light of sunset. Inside my house, my home, sheltered this moment of connection like a cupped hand protects a flame. I had thrown him a surprise party. I had watched his world collapse. I had lit the match that burned away our past. But from that destruction had come this: a life reclaimed, a self rediscovered, and the knowledge that I was more than enough exactly as I was.